Hey everyone, it's Carly Hall, and today's tutorial is the Glowforge tutorial on how to cut wood and engrave wood on both sides with your Glowforge. So if you have been trying to figure out how you can cut something and then flip it over to engrave both sides, this tutorial is for you. Or if you want to cut something as a jig and then place an item in it and then engrave in the perfect spot, then keep on watching. So we're going to set up the file. You can get this file from my Etsy shop. I will put a link in the video description. It is a little time consuming. The engrave on this does take a while. I'm working on a new version where the numbers are interchangeable so that you only have to engrave the floral frame once. But since this is a gift, I wanted to show you just how intricate you could laser engrave something with your Glowforge. So you'll get the file, and depending on what you want to do with it, you'll want to set it up according to that desired outcome. For me, I want to engrave 7 on one side and 8 on the other, both with a floral frame. So I have this set up in a way that kind of works with Glowforge. So Glowforge, when they see a stroke, which is where you have no fill and just an outline, that's why I have it pulled off my artboard so you can see. So my stroke is just a white line. To Glowforge, they will see that as a cut action. So when we bring it into the Glowforge app, that will make a little bit more sense. For anything that is filled, it'll see it as an engrave action. So you can see I just have a black fill and no stroke. So when I drop this into Glowforge, it will see I want to cut the circle and then I want to engrave the floral frame and the month. But I know that I want this on one side and this on the other side. So instead of having 2 different circles, I'm going to overlay them on top of each other. But before I overlay them, I'm going to change this to a different color. It can literally be any color that you want. Just make it a different fill type so that it knows that you want to engrave. You're not going to need that second cut because we actually only need to cut the circle once. I'm going to highlight everything and then I'm just going to align it to the center so that everything is perfectly aligned. Once you're happy, you can save your work. So now that our file is saved, I'm going to bring that into Glowforge. But before we do that, I'm going to set up my laser and put in my material. So on the Glowforge side, I have a piece of wood. It's plywood, but it has this masking layer on it. So there's a paper tape over the top of it, and that will protect my material from being scorched or burned when I cut it. So you can see those burn marks here. And instead of that being on your project, it's going to stay on the masking, which then you can peel away. So we're going to place this into the laser bed. And I'm going to be cutting in the bottom corner. So I'll just line this up so that I can take advantage of this space here, hopefully. And then I'm going to use these honeycomb tray pins, and I'll link to these in my video description. But you can cut these out using your Glowforge. And these are really important because this is what's going to hold down your material. So not only does it keep your material flat, but it also will keep your material from moving when we take out our cut file. You'll want to use a couple to make sure that it's really secured down. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a bounce there. So we're just going to add a couple more pins so that this material stays really flat. Once you're happy with your pins, you can close your lid and power on your machine. Okay, you'll have to excuse the humming in the background. That is the Glowforge. But we are now on the app for the Glowforge, which is a web-based application. So we are looking at the scanned bed of the laser. You can see that's the piece of wood that I just put in. And this is proof grade material, which means it came from Glowforge, but you absolutely do not need to use proof grade material. I buy a lot of my wood from Home Depot and mask it myself with transfer paper. So I will link in the video description some of the woods that I use from Home Depot, as well as the transfer tape, which is a paper. You don't want to use a plastic, that you can apply to the wood surface, and then you'll just want to brayer it down with a brayer. So that works just as well as using proof grade material. All right, so let's continue on. We're going to upload our artwork, which we just worked on. So I'm going to grab that file that I just saved and open that up. Here's my monthly marker. Let's make sure it fits in this little spot. You can see that I barely have enough room here, but that will work great. So I'm just going to scoot that over, making sure to avoid those honeycomb pins. And you can see that all 3 portions are moving together. So I have that cut line and then the 2 engraved files. Really cutting it close here. Okay, so then we are going to set our material in the upper left-hand corner. Right now it says unknown, and I'm going to be using the medium basswood plywood. And watch as those things now change. So I selected that, And these two actions turned into engrave actions since they are fills, and this turned into a cut action, which is exactly what we want. But to start, we know we want to ignore both of the engraves first because we are just cutting around the circle. And that'll actually be a little bit easier to see where we're placing this too. So you can get as close or as far away to the edges as you feel comfortable, and then we are going to cut that out. I'm using the proof grade cuts, but if you want to change your settings, you can slow down the speed. I have it at full power, and then the focus height will autofocus when it is about to cut. We'll go ahead and click print, and Glowforge will give us an estimated time on how long this will take. All right, so this cut will take 34 seconds. All right, I know that Glowforge hum is still there, but you can see on the screen it says the print is done, so we can pull it out of the laser. So we're gonna open the lid, and then I like to use a knife for this part. You can just use any type of straight edge, and then you'll wanna grab the piece out. And you can see that the masking, it has all the char on it, which will pull away. But before we do that, we're gonna wipe the edges with a paper towel, just so that doesn't spread onto our actual face of our wood. And you can see that I'm just kind of rolling it. This isn't wet, it's just a dry paper towel. And I'll go around just to make sure that all that char comes off, so I'm not spreading that to the face of my project. So once I've cleaned off the edges, I can peel off the masking on both sides to reveal the wood. You can see how nice and clean that is, no char marks. We'll peel away the back side as well. All right, so now you'll pick which side you want each number to be on. I'll start with this side since the grain is a little bit more obvious. And we're just going to drop that back into the jig, which is really nice because those pins are holding it in place. So this hasn't moved at all. And I can just place my little wood circle right back in place, which is why this makes a great jig. So even if I didn't cut the circle, but I had pre-cut circles, I could drop another circle right in that spot. So back over on our Glowforge software, you can see the Glowforge has updated the view. You can now see the wood circle has been unmasked and put back into the spot. We know that we've already cut our circle, so we now can ignore this action, and we're gonna pick which number we want to engrave first. So I'll start with the 7, and we're just going to click Engrave, and you can see that now the 7 is highlighted and the 8 is ignored. I haven't moved any of my artwork. Everything is in the exact same spot. And I'm going to use the setting that I used for this project, which is 1000 speed and 80 precision power with 195 lines per inch. This will take a little bit of time, but these settings are my favorite settings for this project. Once you're happy with the settings, we are going to make sure that we just are doing this action. We're ignoring the second action and ignoring the cut action. Then we'll click print. So this engrave will take 15 minutes and 50 seconds on both sides. We'll start with a 7. So I'll time lapse this so that you can see it a little bit quicker, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll set up the second engrave. All right, our 7-month marker is done, so we can take our knife and just pop this out, and then we'll just flip it over so that we are even on both sides, and then we'll pop that back in. Taking a look back at the Glowforge software, we are now going to just ignore the 7, and we're going to engrave the 8. So you can see just how easy it is to switch between those two. And like I was saying, if you have additional circles that you pre-cut but ended up not using, you can drop those into this jig and then continue to cut these monthly markers or whatever design you're cutting. So again, I'm going to choose my monthly marker setting, which is super easy to make a custom setting. And then we are going to make sure that we're ignoring the 7, ignoring the cut. And I'll talk about this a little bit later on, but I just want to mention it in case I forget. But the reason that I peel off the masking before is because if we left the masking on, then we would be weeding out all of the inside of the masking, and that takes a long time. So I find this to be a lot more efficient for me, and it just works better for my workflow. Okay, so we have the 8 ready to go. We're going to click print and engrave the other side. My Glowforge is auto-focusing in the background, but again, notice that I did not move the artwork. So even if it looks off, you can see the cut line looks off a little bit. Do not adjust your artwork at all. That is the most important piece of advice I can give you. You can see over here, the leaves look like they're gonna hang off, but I will show you at the end where those leaves end up so we can see just how important it is not to move your artwork at all. This is important. Okay, so let's go back over to the Glowforge and engrave this side. All right, so our Glowforge is done engraving the back, so we're just gonna pop this guy out and I'll show you what it looks like, and we'll go over a couple last minute notes. But again, if you had other circles that you wanted to drop into this jig, you can still use this space with your file that is currently on your computer. So if you wanted to continue engraving this image because you are working on lots of sets, you can keep on popping in different circles and engraving those using that jig. Again, you just want to make sure that you don't move the artwork so that it's perfectly centered. All right, let's take a look at this final project. So here is the final engrave. You can see that it cut perfectly and then it engraved it perfectly centered. If you look at these two leaves here, you can see that the edges are evenly spaced and it's in the center of the wooden disc. And then on the back side, remember how it looked like that leaf was going to get cut off right there, and it did not. It's perfectly centered as well. So you can see that we did not move the artwork. It stayed perfectly centered. This wood, you can see there is a lot of variation in the color. This is the proof grade basswood from Glowforge. So there is a little bit of variation, so that's important to note. I don't finish these with anything. I leave them raw since they're going to be photographed with babies, but you can absolutely stain it or paint it, whatever you'd like to do. If you want to paint it, you may want to leave the masking on, but I wanted to talk about why I don't leave the masking on, because right now, if I pulled this out of the laser, then I'd have to peel out the tape in all these little areas, and that's just super time consuming. It's like weeding if you're familiar with Cricut projects or silhouette projects. So I choose to take the masking paper off before I engrave it, and then it comes out of the laser basically ready to go. So hopefully these tips and tricks were helpful. I know once I figured this out, it saved me a lot of time. Of course, your engraves do take a little bit more time on the Glowforge, but you can make them less intricate or use art that's a little bit less detailed. So there's lots of options here. But for me, I love giving these as gifts, and I find them so satisfying when they come out of the laser. So hopefully you found this helpful. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you have any tips or tricks when it comes to using your Glowforge. And you'll have to let me know if you found this tutorial helpful in the sense that you want to see more Glowforge tutorials, or if you just want me to stick with Cricut, let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.